the roles in genetic bonding, in taking people in, not just in sex, but in intimate conversations, you could say. Okay? Genetic roles, the themes that we play when we take in support of building something. Because remember, where this channel is in a large group of people, it's a OC16, or a control mechanism of the larger groups in the WAs. So it is about building our world, building our societies, building our businesses, anything that has to do with creativity, because this is the creative channel of the defense circuit. So that 59th gate, the genetic imperative to reproduce and to take, this is how we take in the roles that we take on in order to be able to take in. And what we're taking in is the other. So in taking in the other, if you look at the dynamics of the nature of life, everything about the nature of life is quite literally our relationship with others. Everything is built on that. We come into a binary system, as Ra calls it, in which we are designed genetically to be deeply, deeply attracted to the other person. And to be deeply attracted to what is different. From the genetic point of view, this is what is enormously important. Really, really attracted. Looking for viability of the furtherance of our species by mating with what is different. Bonding with what is different. So here, as we know, the gate 59 is the gate of sexuality, our genetic imperative to bond and to be fertile. It's the gate of dispersion. This is the role, genetic role, that we internalize when we take people in. Okay? So we begin with the one, the penetrator. Ra says he had a nickname for this many, many years. He called it the caveman or cavewoman line. You're dealing with a lower trigram theme. You're dealing with self-absorption. You're dealing with looking inward. This is about banging people over the head and dragging them back by the hair to your cave. He would joke. Okay, that is the self-absorption, self-involvement. It's part of the lower trigram. The lower trigram being, remember again, not socially comfortable, maybe. Yeah, you can kind of see that as far as the thematics that are there and what they express or display as. So that we know underneath the first line there's this insecurity. So the fear of the investigator drives it to want to find a solid foundation in that bond. So the penetrator is in many ways an observer or watcher, not watcher in the voyeuristic sense. It's not that kind of watching, but they're looking to see whether the other person is really for them. I know in bonding with my husband, who is a 5'1", he didn't agree to get married to me until it was like 6 years into our relationship, as far as us actually going through with it. And Ra would joke about first lines, you know, having this relationship, maybe you're at their 50-year wedding anniversary, and you walk up to the first line profile, and you ask that first line profile, so is this it? Is this the one? And he's still investigating, something like that. So they're really observing in order to find out the other person, its foundation, or their relationship's foundation. Is it solid? Is it something that will stand the test of time, maybe? Okay, so that is the first line. Now let's go look at an example chart. Donald Trump with his conscious first line penetrating and his unconscious adventurer. So Ra says the penetrator goes deeper into the other than anyone else, deeper into the other in order to see that there is some solidity in the other. And they can only take once they have penetrated. They cannot take without penetration. They cannot just blindly take somebody in, because the moment they blindly take somebody in, they're going to pay a real price for that. Because the dilemma for them is that they're not very good at ending what they start. They're not good at it at all. There is a deep part of them that simply assumes that they just need to continue to do their investigation because they can't really be certain that it's not good. It can be an agonizing process for them. Here is Albert Einstein. You can see also the penetrating companion now, though. And in his design, thank you, Katja, for adding on the additional line values that we have. You can see he also has an aspect that is seductive. Now, it's at this point where you get confused, but remember, because there's so many things, keynotes there to weave in, remember, where is that fifth line coming from? It's coming from a specific activation in the body graph. So in context, that is a thing that you can add on keynotes and how and why that's going to show up in that way. Remember, when it's in a channel, it's fixed. So you lean on the definition of the channel. And what we're talking about are our genetic roles in bonding that the body is going to respond to, in addition to the authoritative process. Okay? So Ra says there are ways in which the information is being taken in from the other, both the visual information and the olfactory information, all kinds of information, and that there is a focus and an intensity of the penetrator that if you can catch it, you can see it. Maybe you see it on their face with their first line profiles. Maybe you feel it in their body, the way their body is attuned to you and penetrates you deeply, down deep into the core. So, when we get to the second line, we have a shift. We're looking at the loner. Remember, these are our genetic strategies that we have going on here. None of these aspects are there to not get intimacy or to not find or take intimacy. It's very important to see that these are very different genetic techniques for getting the other. Kind of like you're fishing. What is your way? Shyness is a strategy. Shyness, self-imposed barriers, the restriction of the sex drive to maintain separateness, that is a barrier and a strategy for gaining intimacy with the other. You know how some people like the challenge, like to crack that nut? On the other side it says infertility, rooted psychologically or biologically, that conditions the drive for separateness. So when we go to the second line, we have a shift. Here is the loner. Okay, none of these aspects are there to not get intimacy. Remember, it's very important that that shyness is a genetic strategy. Ra says, it's a trap. All of these things are traps. If there's a penetrator that's examining you, the worst thing you can do is say to them, what are you doing? I wonder if that resonates with you. What are you doing? Does it catch them off guard? Let's look at the two. The loner is the one that says, don't bother me, don't bother me, don't bother me. You can't touch me, you can't come near me, right? We know it's the leave me alone line. So we all know people who are like that. There's this sheen of don't bother me because it's never going to work. And yet there's always somebody who knows how to break down that barrier. That's what the loner is trying to attract with its shyness. So thematically, it's very important to understand their power. Here's Oprah Winfrey with her 2-4 loner companion profile. And not to see it as a handicap in the sense that they all have these barriers and they're never going to get the one that's for them, because it's not true. They will get precisely the one that's for them if they operate in alignment with their decision-making strategy. Always operating correctly is the key for the unfolding of the right bonds, the right intimacy. Great example, you see, no 59 there, and yet mind resonates with the loner, body resonates with companion. And that is her role for genetic intimacy, for bonding, for taking. And it is a taking of the other and pulling them into your life. The moment you do that, you have a tribal support mechanism that immediately raises its head. See the tribe there, the ego circuit and the defense circuit. So in other words, this is a bargain business because it's tribal. All tribe is bargain based. Taking somebody in can never be, in essence, casual. Of course, any attempt at it being casual leads to the normal problems, often to disease. And not only disease, but once you take in a human being on an intimate level in sex, you are carrying around that person's frequency for the next 7 years. I don't know, especially you younger folks, if you've ever heard this from Ra, but when I heard this many years ago, I was a little bit shocked. I was like, oh shit, because I was still in my promiscuous phase in the beginning of my human design experiment. And that carrying on of their energy, it's not just energy. Go ahead and Google chimeric DNA and get totally freaked out that other people's DNA can go on living inside of you. Ew. Sorry, had to do that. Learn through trial and error. Excuse me. The adventurer. The third line is the adventurer. The third line carries a burden. It really carries a burden within the mating sense. And just to keep it within that perspective for a moment, they're not interested in taking the person next door, if you know what I mean. Adventurers always want the adventure. They want the openness to new experiences. The third line is about trial and error. So there's a lot of experiences in adventures that go, quote unquote, wrong, where you learn something really valuable if you're operating in alignment. Now, of course, we all know that the third line carries this bonds made and broken theme. And it's not surprising, given that they are the adventurer, that they often blunder. They often make mistakes. And those mistakes are the gene's favorite gift. Why? Because the third line would love to bond with something that is very, very different. Lots and lots of, what did they used to say back in the day? Spreading one's seed. You know, lots of getting yourself out there into the world. Now, of course, don't take this as always all 3 5s or all third lines are promiscuous, because that isn't the case. If you're stuck in the third line as your profile, your conscious personality profile, and you don't do anything different and you just think you got to go around and, you know, have sex with everybody, then yeah, it can be promiscuous, but always take it into context with the rest of the design. Okay? But this is the most promiscuous line. Openness, where one is empowered through union and intimacy with others, Saturn exalted. Or Mars detriment, where the drive for empowerment through union and intimacy can lead to promiscuity. So if you look at the line itself, you can see that there are these themes of promiscuity and all these other things that can be built into it, like the problems that come with promiscuity and unprotected sex, most particularly. My mind went into memories there. There's all kinds of problems you could have operating incorrectly. And correctly, I guess. Who knows? All right. So the lower trigram, those were the ones that did not have the kind of ability in context with others to have as much of a comfort with things. The 4, 5, and 6 are more transpersonal. So when they're taking in, they might be more suave, you could say, to say the least, if you know any people like this with the 4, 5, or 6 in their profile. So now let's talk about the fourth line. When we're dealing with the fourth line, these are our companion people. These are our friendship people. This is about, here you can see with Angela Davis, for one, being a companion who is penetrating. Yeah, conscious companion with a penetrating body in its intimacy. So when we're dealing with the fourth line, this is where we have the theme of voyeurism. So all you 4/6s, I now know what you do on your computer at night. I'm just kidding. Sorry. We are dealing with this theme of the companion that can stand back and hear the stories. Boy or girl, you end up hearing things that as a companion normally is saved for same-sex friends. The kind of things that girls tell girls and boys tell boys, because when you're a companion, when you're a friend, you get this voyeuristic opportunity to get to the other side of the story. It's the part of this that is an ongoing finding out and waiting, bonding through friendship. Because they are, after all, the opportunist. They're going to wait for that moment where friendship can become a deeper physical intimacy. So waiting for right timing. Once there's enough of an establishment of that friendliness that is there, the friend can take the opportunity of being the confidant, and when that person is not in relationship with that other person anymore, right there to catch it. Or I have had lots of experience with 2/4s. They'll say, oh, I just want to be friends. I just want to be friends. I just want to be friends. Well, let's do something, let's get together. Let's be friends. And then all of a sudden, boom, you find yourself alone with them in an intimate relationship. Oops, that happens. But that's their way. Now, they may not admit it if they're a fourth line body, but that is their physical way. We're looking at the gate of dispersion. Remember, genetic strategies that are perfect in and of themselves. Every one of us has a predisposition to differentiate. And one of the deepest, every time the internet goes bad, I'm going to take an opportunity to drink water. Okay. So Ra says one of the deepest aspects of the representation of our differentiation is there in the profile. Remember, it's always going to show up specifically for that person in context with the right others, not everybody. Not everybody, just the right others. So following the strategy and authority is the key here. He says, he has to be very careful that whenever we go into something like this, for especially us human design geeks, we try to figure out how to play a specific role appropriate to our profile. Oh, this is how I'm going to be able to get the girl or guy or whatever. This is trying to take this information and then play out a role, just like when you hear new coming students to human design only speaking in keynotes, and you can tell that they're not jiving with it because they're not living it yet. They're not living according to strategy and authority, and they're just paying lip service to it. Please don't get caught up in the trap of trying to massage this into your role of how to get people. Okay, so you don't have to worry about all of this. It's not something for you to do. It's something for us to learn, to be able to interpret a chart and to be able to help people, advising them and getting them back in touch with their strategy and authority. Okay, these perfect genetic strategies will play out perfectly for them in right timing with the right others. Oh, Rose, did you say that's true with my 2/4 story? Yep. Yep. Yeah. Okay. So as we move up here, further from the 4, we're going into the 5. And that 5th line is the line of seduction. This is the seducer. So seduction, Ra says, often has a bad name. And in being a 5th line being, I have to defend seduction, or at least I hope so, because it feels okay to me. One has no choice in this life. You are what you're given genetically. Seduction is the calling out of intimacy from the other. Okay? Seducer, seduced. Being seductive with one's expression of internalization of intimacy. So here's Ra with his fifth line seductive personality. I remember first listening to Ra, and I freaking loved him. Like, I mean, loved him. I mean, like, oh my God, I love you, Ra. You know, I've had boyfriends accuse me of loving Ra, not them, because I just love this man. I mean, I really do. Let's see, 2 years before I came to human design, I was in a relationship with an older man in his, he wouldn't tell me how old he was, but he was in his 50s, probably late 50s. And they kind of similarly looked alike. And so I just had the hugest crush on Ra back in the day. But it's his voice, something about his voice, seductive and penetrating. Can you feel that penetration as it gets into your cells and it changes you? Like structurally, it felt like every time I listened to him, which I listened to him for so many years and so long, it felt like my body would shift. Definitely my mind would crack. You know, he would seduce you into paying attention to him. He's a manifester. Manifestors are paid attention to because they got motor to the throat with the right people, obviously. So Ra says the other thing is the better they get at seduction, the closer they come to being able to fulfill their imperative, which is to be able to gain access to bring into their life, to take those that without the seduction they never, ever could have had. So seduction is their theme, plain and simple. I can remember him joking about how he seduced us, you know, guilted and seduced us to be not self. 7 years. You'll be, hang on. He said, 7 years. This is a process of deconditioning. He seduced us to experiment with their strategy and authority. Stop being not self. Come over here, try this. And in 7 years, you know, you'll be a new person. And yeah, you are, but the deconditioning doesn't end. You know, it's another 7 years. So he kind of tricked us, that trickster gate, 26, you know, to get into this experiment and to see what it would do. What could we discover in our empowerment of self, in our awakening to self, and being initiated into the mysteries of the higher self. It's such a beautiful gift. So, yeah, seduction is their theme. You can hear it in the voice, you know, and it's not like everybody's gonna want to fall in love and have sex and have this man's babies. No, it's just, it calls to you, okay? Either that personality construct, if you're a fifth line personality consciousness, is going to make the call and call to you, call to strangers, or if it's flipped, the body will be seductive. It's seductive movements, perhaps. What if it's in, you know, Uranus, unconscious? So there's all of these different ways that we change and morph depending on the situation. Not just our presence as far as the quality of our voice or what we might say, but also in interaction with others. Other people can literally change our shape. When you start to go deeper into rave psychology and primary health system, it changes who we are, what we present to them as far as how we interact. So the thing about correctness, Ra says, is human beings and their minds. The not self mind is really just an enormous problem. Enormous problem. Let's look at Emma Watson. Oh, this one, I looked at her recently and I got so sad seeing some of the pictures that I saw. It looked like she was on drugs, even though there's a lot of either that or an eating disorder. There's a lot of content out there saying that she's not, so I imagine that that may be something that she's being challenged by. So she's a 5-2 now. That is a seductive personality, but a loner body. Very, very different than the penetrating body. So the thing about correctness, again, it's their minds. If that mind gets stuck in being the seducer seduced and doesn't pay attention to making sure that the decision is health, safety, security based, and wait for the call, wait to be recognized and invited, then this person is lost. She's lost overdoing it with the sex drive. Absolutely. You know, if she's not paying attention to her body's need for being a loner. It's a really big problem. So it's very, very easy for twos especially to be conditioned away from your nature. You're going to be an old maid, here Ross says, and you're going to die in your bed. Come on, we'll take you out. You need to meet more people. So everybody says, oh, well, why are you at home alone? Come on, let's go out. Let's go play. There's so much to do, you know? Don't be at home alone. It's unhealthy for you. I remember somebody accusing me, a manifestor, astrologer. When I was in the beginning of the human design experiment, I spent a lot of time alone. And my second line environment makes it more comfortable for me to be alone. Finally settling into operating correctly. And he said, no, that's unhealthy. You got to get out more. He had the channel of openness. So Ross says, you can see what the problem is that if you're not operating correctly, they backfire on you. They just do. And they can end up bringing a great deal of discomfort into your life because it's very easy for you to be conditioned away from your nature, especially those second line loners who has maybe all those friends, two fours maybe, that want to constantly get dragged out. It goes on all the time that people will do this to you. Come on, you got to do this. Scaring you by telling you what's going to happen. You're going to die in your bed alone. Don't be a loner. Let's go. And then even though, and remember the splenic center as an example is the one that is so very, very easy to ignore. Other people dragging you out and the little quiet voice that you ignore, you don't pay attention to, is telling you, no, don't do that. And then all kind of hell breaks loose, especially on a sexual escapade when there's drugs involved. So 5, you can't control that, Ross says, the seduction from the mental plane. Ross says, of course, seducers learn very quickly because as fifth line beings, they get the initial positive projection. But so quickly that the positive projection turns into, don't try to seduce me. And then immediately it gets into all kinds of dilemmas because it's simply not the right kind of being that you're with in the first place. You can't control the seduction from the mental plane. Another reason why to remember, always come back to strategy and authority. Never tell somebody if they want to get that person, oh, you have to be more seductive. Help them find their own truth. Don't make them be a crutch on you. Don't make them rely on you for advice. Help them find their own guidance. They have it within. Ross says, I'm always amazed at watching my seduction machine at work because it's never up to me, my passenger. It's never been up to my passenger. I've had a long track record, and it's really funny to just watch what happens. It's a natural phenomenon. It's a natural way of bringing things out. And when somebody says to me how important friendship is in a relationship, it's like my first line sort of harmonically can sort of grasp that, but it's not my nature. Yeah. So it can help you feel better about the things that are not in your nature that other people are saying you have to do. So much. I love how comforting it allows us to be the unique expression of what we are. So we're going to look at the sixth line being. Sixth line being. And when you're dealing with a sixth line being, if you meet them in their first 30 years, they're living out as the adventurer. 9 times out of 10, it doesn't work. So then you get all these early divorces, you get these early split ups, and usually you'll end up with single parents, this kind of thing. Multiple marriages and so forth. We know that the sixth line in the first 30 years makes mistakes with its intimacy. There's that sixth line. So Ra says, think about them for a moment. When you're dealing with a sixth line being, oh, I already read that. Oops, the sixth line. Yeah. So they have this aloofness, this observer quality, maybe this pulling out from that, when they're in their first 30 years, way more open, way more potentially promiscuous. I would say that would be really true for 6-3s as opposed to 6-2s, you know. And then being able to pull out of that promiscuity and have more of this licking your wounds time where you reflect upon all of the experiences you had in the first 30 years of your life. So there's Leonardo DiCaprio, and he is that 6-2 dreamer mind with the loner body. So Ra says there's this tension that is there, that sacral emotional tension, ultimately in that 6 line, that 59-6. And as we recall from sexual bonding, as Melanie reminded, it is about, looking for soulmate, the dreamer, dreaming of this or that. And 6 lines always wanting that bond of what can be trusted. Because they're looking for that role model type quality in the relationship. Authenticity. When you think about what a 6 line might stand for, this is soul mates. My husband doesn't have very many 6s. He doesn't believe in soulmates, like as in one for the rest of your life. But that is the 6 line bonding strategy. Are you my soulmate? Are you my soulmate? Okay. So there's the one night stand now. The tendency based on personality or circumstances to accept only temporary unions that may be otherwise impossible or dangerous to continue. The 6 line one night stand in intimacy. So there's a power for intimacy regardless of conditions, or on the other side, the drive for sexual and intimate diversity. Ra says if it is understood in this way, you begin to see that whoever you have intimacy with, it's a good idea that it's correct. Doesn't matter whether that's a friend or a lover. That very correctness of it is very important because it is a very, very powerful connection. Now, I know we're talking about the sex gate, 59. But also think of it as taking someone into one's secret realms, your individual circle, your private nest, what have you. And then you get a better sense of what are ways that we're designed to be penetrated or dream or open or what have you. The ways that we take in life can be in intimate conversations that lead to intimacy in these genetic roles, how we take in the other. All right? That is our 59th gate. The taking in here in our genetic imperative to make more, to reproduce, we take. And then the 27th gate, it is about giving. The energy to put your care out into the world. So let's go dive into the 27th gate, our genetic imperative to give our energy to others so that we have the ability to care, to nourish, to nurture, to support, to have compassion. And this is nourishment, 27, the gate of caring, a genetic imperative for us to extend our energy beyond ourselves and give it to others. So this is the thing that I was surprised myself to see come out even more in fullness. as far as the externalization of one's care or compassion, nourishing others, nourishing the product of the bonding, whether that be babies, whether that be, the children that you care for, if you're working at a school, or if you are in charge of a company, the people that are under your care, as far as, your employees or your contractors or the people who depend on you. So Ra says with this 27, we are not here to simply take in. The tribe is the 2 sacral gates of the defense circuit. That's the tribe, right? The only place the tribe touches the sacral, these 2 defense circuit gates. And there's the defense circuit itself. I think of it as the pelvic floor, holding everything in, holding everything up. Some Ra says, but it's also much larger than that in terms of a role. It is the general theme of the way in which you will offer of yourself to the other, to any other in that sense. So let's go look at the first line. Line 1 is called selfishness. The foundation of giving, Ra says, is being selfish. The whole thing about giving is that one has to have in order to give. And he says again, we're beginning with the lower trigram, and when we start with the lower trigram, you can see that the first line is the line of the selfish. Now, of course, that sounds terrible. This is supposed to be about giving. But here we immediately start off with selfishness. And not only that, but the foundation of giving is being selfish. It's not selfish to put your own mask on your face in an airplane when it's going down in order to breathe, because if you can't breathe, you can't put your mask, those masks that drop down, on anybody else. So you have to have in order to give. So the first line is deeply, deeply selfish. It isn't necessarily that you're going to get a lot from these beings unless they're correct and ready. Otherwise, they're going to be very, very absorbed in, no, I have to hold on to this and I can't really give it. So here's again Donald Trump. And his externalization role, and his genetic role, is about being selfish on the conscious side and driven on the unconscious side. Ra says that first line is deeply, deeply selfish. I can't give it. Now remember when we were on the expression side, or internalization, the internalization side, penetrating. Ra says you penetrate into the other. You pull them in very deeply. And then, selfish. So it is this first line theme here in the profile. If the first line is not operating correctly, if the being is not operating in alignment, they have very, very little that they can offer to the other. And if they have very little they can offer to the other, no matter how successful they are in penetrating, their relationships are simply not going to last, because ultimately they have to transcend that theme. It's built into the lines. It's there. So the moment that they are secure, the moment that they really have, this is the moment that they can begin to give. Now let's look at the second line, the giver. You can see that beautiful dynamic between the two. So the thing that's so extraordinary about the second line, Ra says, is that nobody in this life is ready to give you more. As a matter of fact, in terms of the not-self, they will give to a point that they can no longer support themselves. They give you the shirt off their back. They give you everything.
Right discernment is key. Who are those others that are simply sapping off of your strength and not giving back? Those are the ones that don't give in return. Okay, So Prince William, the loner line. And then we have in his externalization, the giver. So because they can find great warmth and protection and nourishment from the giver, this is what other people see in them. That they may be uncomfortable. Yeah, they can feel discomforted or disquieted if they don't have it to give. Easily conditioned away to give when it's not correct. Of course, ultimately, Ra says, ultimately, they can get to a point where it can be deeply, deeply depressing for them and so deeply uncomfortable. And the barriers come up, and that's the end of the story. These are roles that can be deeply impacted by error in life, the not operating correctly. Then you end up with a totally misguided understanding of the potential of your relationship with the other. Then when we come to the third line, we come to, get some water here. When we come to the third line, we come to a very, very interesting theme. This is the theme of the driven. Greed. The obsession with having more, much more than one needs. The power derived in having more than one needs, whether sexually, mentally, or materially. And then the lust for power to get more than one needs. Being driven in externalization. Here's Deepak Chopra again. He was the adventurer, internalizing, being driven and externalizing. So when you have a third line being who is supporting you and giving to you, their ability to drive you is incredible, and to drive you to go beyond, to drive you to be the best at this or at that, to master this or that. They are an enormous nurturing force driving you forward. Here's Keith Richards, 3-6. Driven and realistic instead of the driven executor. Ross says, by the way, when it's incorrect, these are the parents that think their child is a genius and they drive that child with all kinds of support that eventually creates nothing more than a neurotic being. There are all these kinds of perversions that come with any of these roles on the externalization side, not operating correctly. Going from adventurer to being driven. So it can always be a one-way street with any of the identity roles. You put it out, they don't take it, what to do? This is identity. It's just your role. It's what you be. Yeah, it's who you are. It's what they see. But you're not demanding anything. You're not asking for anything. There is no bargain and there is no deal. So you can see how different it is when we get to the tribe. There's something sticky there. There's something that is required in the deal of being in intimacy, taking people in, or in externalizing your carrying out. So if you're not operating correctly and your partner is not operating correctly, then you end up with all of the dilemmas that are there as part of the script of the dysfunctional relationships that just splatter the planet. How important it is to be correct, and more so, the more radical you can be in terms of establishing correct relationships in your life. This is a key. Not simply accepting that the old relationships that hang around you still, that here there's nothing that can be done with them. And this is one of the reasons I was so adamant in the beginning of following even Becky Markley, who has a defined throat. She has a defined throat center as a projector, and even she stopped initiating, period, completely with family. Now I see myself
only talking to them when they call, when they ask, when they call. It's correct. And I get a lot less drama. My husband, nope, not so much. He's still stuck in there, but he's much more tribal than I am. Okay. Oh boy, we get to come to the upper trigram now. The upper trigram of externalization, and we come to the fourth line theme of magnanimous. 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 Boy, that sounds good. That sounds really good, doesn't it? You can hear him. That tricky teacher. There is a grandness of generosity that can be there in the fourth line being. But what's interesting about it again, this is not for everyone. They can be very magnanimous to those who are friends. They are rarely magnanimous to those who have given them opportunity. So it's about the friends, the friend network. It can be wonderful, after all, Ra says. When it's correct, it's something that can be deeply generous and can lay out the possibilities of opportunity for others. However, in the not-self, it always seems like a sham. That is, the not-self fourth line being gives you the impression that they can be very generous, gives you the impression that they can help you, because after all, you're on their network. But in fact, they can studiously ignore you and not give you the support. The natural sharing of attained abundance, the power and strength to share generously, and the potential loss of power and strength through indiscriminate sharing. So when we get to the fifth line now, we're going to the executor. To me, it's one of those very, very ironic, and of course in the 30, line 5, the line of irony, it's a very much an ironic line. Underneath, the seducer, who can only seduce to get you in, is somebody who is ready to take complete responsibility for your life. And this is what the executor is all about. There's Ra with his executor, conscious personality, and the unconscious body, selfish. So you can see that this is the harmony to the giver. Now, it's not the same thing. It's not this natural generosity that will literally share their dinner with you. The executor is something different, taking responsibility for executing things. The giver will say, "You want some of my food?" But the executor will feel responsibility to do the best they can to call in resources. That is what they're good at, to get access to things that will make it possible for others to be able to have the things they need in support. And now you see why I gave you so many resources. Because you need these things. You need to know these things in order to do the work in a way that is satisfying, successful, peaceful. Have your mastery of how this works. And Ra says, I guess in many ways the most interesting things for me is this combination between internalized dreamer and externalized realist. Here we are at the sixth line. I think this is a wonderful comment on the nature of a sixth line being, that in terms of externalization and support, they are designed to be deeply realistic about who deserves the support. Who deserves the support? So remember, third lines can be driven, and also it is the line of realism. And that was the first 30 years of that sixth line being's person's life. Okay? But the moment you get to the sixth line being on the roof, this deep realism comes in. And this is something so essential as a tool for the sixth line being in the future for what is awaiting that sixth line being in terms of what it means to come off the roof. This realism, he says, here's Leonardo, this is 6-2 again, now a realistic giver in nourishment, in externalization. This realism is something that touches them very, very deeply when they're correct. The deep recognition of what can be supported, who can be supported and who cannot be supported despite the dreams. The dream is always there. Wouldn't it be wonderful if? This is the role model after all. This is the natural leader. Wouldn't it be wonderful if, he says. So the dreamer, and then realistic in giving out. He says it disappears into realism. Who really deserves support and who doesn't? There is a coldness to the not-self six-line being when they go up on the roof. This realism is tinged with the third-line pain, the trial and error, the mistakes, and the problems in the relationships, all of those things that get carried forward into a realism that is not legitimate. The only legitimate realism is a realism that is rooted in what is their strategy and authority. Phew. You can't find out who is for you unless you're giving and taking as yourself. That is the story. And you can't give or take as yourself unless you're correct. It begins with your strategy and your inner authority, or your process of personal authority, if that is your way. So, he says we begin to see the bounty that is there, the potential that is there in our relationships with the other. It's not that we are here to take and give from everyone. It isn't. We are not here to take and give from those that our mind thinks we should. This is the deepest problem, this mind trip that everybody has to be about who they think belongs in their life and who they think they should be supported of and who they think they need in their life. That is such an important thing to grasp, to remember. Because if you're still identified with the I inside of your head about yourself, the I will play guilt trips on you. It will strategize to make you think that you have to get an advantage from somebody, or that they're the only one that's going to provide this opportunity for you, or what have you. So you have to give or you have to take. And that is the thing we begin to see in our lives with regards to much more clear seeing. Remember, it's seeing, seeing, seeing. Everything about awakening is seeing, seeing, seeing for yourself, as yourself, seeing. You may not be able to do anything about what you're seeing, but it is that very seeing that engages the awareness, and it gives you an opportunity for learning and for growth. So in this seeing, when you're watching, remember to ask the question, who's watching? Our dilemma is the personality. It's always the personality, Ra says. You can bang the personality on the head over and over and over and say, look, it's an illusion. You have no choice. You're only looking out the windows. Life is not in your hands. It just seems like that. Look, you've got to stop making decisions with your mind because you're driving yourself and everyone else around you crazy and they're not working for you. And on and on and on. You can say all these things. You can say them louder and louder. But if they don't get it, if they're still believing the lie of the I and the mind, they're still lost in the Maya. And there you have the passenger. The passenger, in the way in which the not-self operates, gets attached to specific aspects of role in themselves, tries to drape themselves in that, misidentifying with one role applied to every single situation, and then getting stuck and lost in that. So now you know more of the multidimensionality of your roles and how everything will play out beautifully, perfectly, when you are operating in alignment. Ross says it's always amazing to look at the mask and to see what is being displayed on the outside. We never see ourselves. Then this is the way for the passenger to really begin to see, to understand how we display ourselves as a creature.
I tell you, the deepest impact that we have because of the Ajna center and its dominance in terms of Homo sapiens, on the other is visual. It's what they see on our face, what they see in our face. We are here to express our uniqueness. It's the only thing that we are here for. We're not here for anything else. It's why you incarnated in the first place. You have a predisposition to differentiate. The great challenge in life is to differentiate, to be different from everybody else.